We can now bring in Gissou Nia, Director of the Strategic Litigation Project at the Atlantic Council. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today. Now, the Israeli operation in Iran over the past 2 weeks exposed some very deep cracks within the Islamic Republic. They proved highly embarrassing. What are you hearing about the crackdown underway of those accused of spying for Israel?
Well, it's not really surprising that the Islamic Republic is responding in this manner. We see that after multiple nationwide protests in the country, they typically tend to increase repression. So after the disputed presidential election in June 2009, there were mass show trials of individuals who were simply activists with next to no evidence saying that they were collaborating with foreign powers. So this is of no surprise, unfortunately. The parliament approved a law on Monday that essentially is saying that individuals can be fast-tracked for trials for espionage. And so they're just following the typical playbook that often they do. But we're gravely concerned about the risks of executions, particularly because there were 3 individuals that appeared to be executed rapidly on allegations of espionage when, of course, that was not the case.
But given that anyone really can be accused of being a spy for Israel, given that the regime has been weakened, if they go too far, won't they risk an uprising on their hands?
This is often the balance. I mean, I think that, in fact, the regime has decided that it needs to instill fear in the hearts of Iranians. Obviously, it was somewhat weakened after the strikes that Israel did against the country. And so I think what they really want to send the message about is do not protest, do not take to the streets. We will round you up, we will arrest you, and we will possibly execute you. So they're just following their typical playbook.
Gissou, we know on Monday that Israel struck Evin prison. Then we got reports that the prisoners from the facility had been moved. Do we know if those prisoners, which include Iranian dissidents and foreign nationals, if they're okay and their whereabouts?
Yeah, we're getting different reports about whether or not these individuals are okay. A lot of them were trapped without access to medical care, safe shelter, essential services, and many of these individuals, the authorities have refused to transfer those who are injured to hospitals, and families are having difficulty reaching their loved ones. So really, instead of actually facilitating the rescue of these prisoners and giving them medical aid, they've intensified repression in the prison. They've been threatening and attacking injured detainees. And it's really difficult to get information because a lot of the family members of these individuals cannot get in touch.
During the war, the 12-day war, as Donald Trump seems to call it, there were figures within Israel, the U.S., and some within the Iranian diaspora who expected some sort of uprising from the street. Were these voices being delusional, given that on the ground in Iran, people were worried for their own lives instead of bringing about some big bang change?
Absolutely. So there was a lot of rhetoric around why didn't they rise up? And now we see this as a very strong current on social media saying maybe the Iranians really didn't want freedom. I find that to be outrageous. The people that we were in touch with, so of course there were individuals who were maybe jubilant at first about the idea of some of these regime officials being killed, but that swiftly changed to a feeling of panic, a feeling of fear as there were evacuations of densely populated civilian areas. And there were people who didn't even have tents. People who have resources could go to the north or go underground or leave for the borders, but others didn't even have tents. They just had blankets and were sleeping on the outskirts of the city when they had been evacuated, and food was being rationed and there was no gas to escape. So I think it's a bit of a fantasy to think that people would rise up in wartime conditions.
Now, you mentioned how typically in the aftermath of a protest or even now the regime will be hell-bent on flexing their muscle. In the aftermath of the Masa Amini and the Women Life Freedom movement, we saw, of course, that crackdown, and then slowly the authorities seem to turn a blind eye and allow women to openly flout the hijab laws in Tehran and other cities. We ourselves at France 24 have carried reports on how women are openly flouting the laws. Given that the regime now will want to crack down? Do you think those small liberties will also be taken away?
Well, I think that we're going to see an increase in repression for sure. The character of what happened here obviously differs from what happened after Mahsa Amini was tragically killed, and that was sort of a rights-based uprising. Now, the state will be incredibly paranoid and seeking to find out who among their midst are the ones that were potentially collaborating with foreign powers. Unfortunately, what it seems that they're doing is going after the most vulnerable, people who have been in detention, who cannot possibly have been the people that were collaborating, and going after people like Ahmed Reza Jalili, who is an Iranian Swedish hostage who's been held for years and denied basic rights. Somebody like Hossein Ronaghi, who's a leading opposition figure. So these are individuals who are not in any way collaborating with foreign powers and instead are people that become symbolic of a rights movement. But the authorities are going to go after these individuals with no evidence, punish them in summary trials, and try to bring draconian punishments against them.
Indeed, because given that the level of penetration we've seen, they should be looking at each other, one would assume. Let's talk about talks with the United States, because Donald Trump says talks with Iran will resume soon, maybe even next week. Is it naive to think that the U.S. president could potentially pressure the Iranians to ease up on human rights, to respect human rights, or does Donald Trump not care about that?
I think we understand that Donald Trump's administration is not one that has human rights at its core. They are not enforcing that in the borders of the U.S., much less anywhere else in the world. But I do think that it's an administration that's very transactional, and so to any effect that there can be some sort of benchmarks put in a deal like this, that's of course welcomed. But I don't have a lot of illusions about the Trump administration being a champion of human rights.
Interesting point. Thank you very much, Gissou, for joining us on the program today. Gissou Nia joining us there.